Hey, good morning, everyone, or at least good morning to those of you in the continental United States, and good afternoon to those of you elsewhere in the world. My name is Bernard, and wanted to welcome you to this morning's very cool webinar on why data sharing and data standardization matter. This is going to be a really interesting webinar in that it is a little bit of a departure from our normal format. This is going to be more of a discussion between our and amongst our presenters. So I've got a few bits of housekeeping to get through real quickly before we get started with the feature presentation. So I will go ahead and dig into that. Just so you know, here's our agenda. I'll be going through housekeeping. I will introduce all of our presenters, and then I will let them get into the most important portion of this presentation, the feature presentation. As for housekeeping, for all of you who are attendees, you will be on mute for the entirety of the webinar, but you are, if you have questions, you're encouraged to submit them throughout the presentation. You can do so through the question section of your toolbar. If for some reason your audio blips out, or you're not hearing things, or the audio is glitchy, the best thing to do is just to X out, close out your GoToWebinar control panel, and then open it back up again. We have found that that typically fixes those problems. If not, send us a question and say that you're having issues, and we will do what we can. Sometimes it is a connectivity issue with local connections, but I will do my best to help out. As for submitting questions, if you look to your control panel, you will see the question section of your toolbar. Yours will look a little different than mine because mine is the almighty organizer view, but you have a question section there. You are welcome to submit questions at any time. We talked with our presenters, and we decided that we were going to push questions to the end of the presentation. So you can ask them at any time as we have our discussion, and then we will bring them up later. And if you have a question for a specific presenter, if somebody says something that you found very fascinating or befuddling, just if you would indicate their name before your question, that way we know to whom to direct it. And then last but not least, in terms of our housekeeping stuff, we have a content disclaimer. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide examples of implementation and should not be considered official recommendations by CDISC unless otherwise stated in the presentation. This webinar is not an authorized CDISC course, is not developed or delivered under CDISC operating procedures, and should not replace a published standard. Please refer to the latest published standards for the most authoritative implementation information. Now, on to introducing our illustrious presenters. So we have three people who will be a part of this discussion today. David Bobbitt, who is the president and CEO of CDISC. David is an entrepreneur, a fundraiser, and a nonprofit executive who has been privileged to lead and launch many amazing organizations. And prior to joining us here at CDISC, he served as the president of the SCORE Foundation in Washington, D.C., where he led the organization to significant growth while maintaining high quality services to America's entrepreneurs. And he served in a senior executive role to launch the New York Genome Center, the newest and next generation in genomic sequencing and bioinformatics platform in the world. And then he also built the largest private sector fundraising program for kidney disease services and research in the US. He holds an MSc in engineering and an MBA from the Darden Graduate School of Business at the University of Virginia. Then next up, we have Rebecca Lee, PhD, who is the executive director of Vivli and on the faculty at the Center for Bioethics at the Harvard Medical School. Previous to her current role as the executive director of Vivli, she was the executive director of the MRCT Center of Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard for over 5 years and remains a senior advisor at the center. She has over 25 years of experience spanning the entire drug development process with experience in biotech, pharma, and CRO environments. And she completed a fellowship in 2013 in the Division of Medical Ethics at Harvard Medical School. Next up we have, last but not least, Dr. Ida Sim. And I was chuckling at this because I've been referring to Dr. Sim as Dr. Sim, not realizing that she not only has an MD, making her a doctor, but also a PhD, making her a doctor. So, and Dr. Sim is a professor of medicine at the University of California in San Francisco and co-directs the biomedical informatics at UCSF rather, Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. Dr. Sim earned her MD and her PhD in medical informatics from Stanford University, where her dissertation was on computational methods for data sharing of clinical trial results. She was trained in primary care internal medicine at the Massachusetts General Hospital and completed fellowships in general medicine and medical informatics at Stanford. And she has a degree in biomolecular engineering from Johns Hopkins University. So now that we've introduced you to our presenters, David, I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins over to you so you can get us started.
Bernard, thank you for that gracious introduction. Everyone, thank you for being here. And Dr. Rebecca Lee and Dr. Ida Sim, thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today. It's exciting to have our first, but I hope the first of many joint CDISC and Vivli webinars as we talk about some areas of mutual interest. So I'm going to talk about why do data standards matter. Next slide, please, Bernard. And I'm still seeing this slide, Bernard, if you've been able to forward. Thank you. And so what does this number mean? I have at the top of the screen, 01071915. Is it a date? If it's a date, does it mean July 1st, 1915, July 7th, January 7th, 1915? Is it Betty White's birthday? What is it? And forward a little bit more, please, Bernard. Could it be, for example, a phone number and it's missing some digits? Or is it a social security number or another type of a unique identifier? And if it's missing some digits, do we know where do they belong? At the front, in the back, in the middle? Could it be the results of a standardized questionnaire? Question 1 answer is 0, question 2 answer is 1, and so forth. And then one more, Bernard. Or could it be, actually, since we're talking about clinical research, the NTC number of a clinical trial? Clinical trials all receive 8-digit numbers to identify them at clinicaltrials.gov. If you're at a hospital or a healthcare setting, you're a site for research, you want to know this because it may actually be important for Medicare and Medicaid billing. It's important for other reasons. It turns out this number does actually match an NTC number, though that's not the purpose behind it today. It's for a cancer trial in Korea. Next slide, please. And so my question is that I'm supposed to answer, what are standards? There was an article in the New York Times earlier this year, a really interesting article about standards, not just data standards. And it has this great quote: "The basic irony of standards is the simple fact that there's no standard way to create a standard, nor is there ever even a standard definition of a standard." Well, it's probably true, but it's not very satisfying. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you the CDISC answer. Data standards, at least as we perceive them, are really organizing and describing metadata. There we go. That's really just the who, what, when, where, how, and why of the data. And when you understand the metadata, if the standard is clear and the data is well prepared, you should have enough context to tell the story of the data. But absent the metadata, you can almost never tell the story. That 8-digit number just came off of a DVD box sitting on my desk at my house. I just bought the DVD for Chernobyl, that great HBO documentary series. It doesn't mean anything without the metadata. And so at CDISC, when we think about standards, we also want standards to be repeatable, to be intuitive whenever possible. In the example of a unique user ID, for example, you wouldn't want to call that unique user ID orange, because that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. You probably want to have some sense that it's a user ID. Next slide, please. Historically, standards have kind of fallen into some categories, though, and I'll talk about them in just as soon as the slide comes up. First are technical standards. Bernard, I'm still not seeing the slide.
The slide has been switched. So
okay.
the historic concepts of standards is showing.
No worries. Okay, thanks, folks. Sorry, I'm on some weak Wi-Fi, I guess. Thanks, Bernard. Along the left, you'll see an example of a technical standard. So technical standards usually about how you build or utilize a machine. This is a great example. If you know how to drive an automatic automobile, you're going to know how to drive whether it's a Toyota in the top screen, a 1950s US Auto in the middle, or at the bottom, a first generation Tesla. I think if you know how to use one, you can use any of them. Content standards, and CDISC says we're a content standards for data, really tell you where information's located in a predictable way. It tells you how to organize and present that information. Also gives you controlled terminology, definitions to utilize. So a great example is letters and postcards and packages. If you can read the language, you know the to, the from, the date it was sent, the currency that paid for that transmission, and how much was paid. But through the years, and at the bottom of the page, we have a data exchange standard, HL7 FHIR, which many people in our community are aware of. That's really a standard for moving data specifically and not so much about the packaging of the data or the content. But through the years, what we've seen is that data standards have really conflated with each other. And so I give you the example from financial services. Checks and credit cards are really examples of a content standard, a technical standard, and an exchange standard. We don't have time today, but so are these giant container ships that have changed how the world trades, how everything happens in the world. Next slide, please. So CDISC content standards, and they're designed to represent the full life cycle of the clinical research process. CDISC started about 20 years ago, and like a lot of standard development organizations, we started with a group of folks who already had standards within an industry. They got together and said, let's share best practices, let's share what we know and understand, let's share our standards that we use at our own companies. And then from those, the first CDISC standard was built. That was SDT, that's our organization and tabulation model. But let's think a little bit about the clinical research enterprise. The most likely use case, the classic use case for a clinical study is going to be a two-arm trial, an intervention trial and a placebo trial, a trial that's designed to understand the effects of a potential pharmaceutical. And so for a regulatory agency, what they're looking for is this product efficacious? Does it work? And is it safe? Does it not harm the human, the person who will need to take it? Related to that is going to be dosing, which is a decision that'll have to be made later. And so CDISC standards were really built organically to represent kind of each of the phases or sections of what such a study might look like. And so coming from the left, we have a preclinical or a non-clinical standard called SIN. And that's a standard really related to animal models and other ways that we look at safety data. For planning, we have PRM, which is the protocol representation model. And moving to the right, CDASH, which is our collection standard, SDTM, which I mentioned is our organization standard, and then ADAM is the analysis standard. And at the end of the process, you may want to submit that data to the FDA or PMDA or another regulatory body. You may want to publish. And you may want to report that data out, or you may want to share. The purpose we're here today is talking about data sharing. To connect each of the standards, we have data exchange standards that are about the packaging of data and help people find the who, what, when, where, why, and how, the metadata about the data in each of these standards. Underneath this at CDISC, we have something called therapeutic area user guides. And so TAUGs, TAUGs have been around for a while. I think of them a little bit like a table of contents. It's a quick start guide to utilizing standards. So if you have a therapeutic area like a cancer or type 2 diabetes or a mental health area that you want to study, CDISC has engaged subject matter experts who will actually tell you, here are examples and here's the parts of each of the standards, particularly the collection, organization, and analysis standards you'll need to utilize. Undergirding all of this, we have a controlled terminology system that's a partnership with Enterprise Vocabulary Service of the National Cancer Institute. Of U.S. National Institutes of Health, and that partnership has been going on for years. It's great. They help us build controlled terminology along with our volunteer teams. Bridge is a model that connects our standard to other standards, and the glossary's been around for a long time. Many people certainly know CDISC for our glossary, which is a set of shared definitions in this space. All of this is just to say this has been built by volunteers through the years. We're a small organization, just a few staff, and our process and our standards are quite mature. We've been utilized all over the world and for a long time, and we're proud of what we've accomplished. Next slide, please. And so at CDISC, we convene a global community of experts to develop and advance data standards of the highest quality. In doing so, we create clarity in clinical research. And working together, because we are a global community, we have to do this together. We enable the accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of data for more meaningful and efficient research that has greater impact on global health. Next slide, please, Bernard. You've probably seen something like this before if you've ever seen verifying data. I won't read the entire slide to you, except to say this is really critical to why we need data standards, not just for data sharing, but also for reuse of data for all the purposes we might want to use data for other than the original use case. Homonyms, words that sound alike but are actually very different words. Terminology, so is it gender, is it sex, is it male, female, is it 0, 1? Well, how do you know what the right terminology is, and how do you share that across cultures and language barriers? Definitions, which is highly related. You may have a definition for temperature, and so do I. I say it's 32 degrees, and you say, wow, that's hot, and I say it's freezing, because I'm working in one way to measure temperature, and you're working in another. But definitions reach far beyond that in the research enterprise, and we know precise definitions are really important to effective research. Relationships, what you see on the right, I'll show you a bigger one later, is what's now called a knowledge graph. We used to call them mind maps as well, lots of names for them, but the idea that data is related to each other. And so understanding how those relationships work in the real world. And then finally, organization. If you can't find the data, you waste time and resources. You want to be able to know where the data you expect to find is located. And if it's missing, you remember my example earlier about the 8-digit number, you want to know where precisely it's missing and what, if anything, it tells you because it's missing. Next slide, please. CDISC is certainly the global standard for clinical data research. We've been mandated in the US and Japan, and we're recommended in the European Union and China. We're used in lots of other places as well. Next slide, please. And CDISC is growing rapidly. We're a 20-year-old organization, incorporated 20 years ago, started just a little bit before that. And you can see the countries where our members are mostly located, but we're used all over the world. Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, South Africa, places that aren't colored in this map because we don't have many members. Nonetheless, our standards are used there as well. Next slide, please. And so I think this is really important to talk about. Rhonda Facile is the person who says this at CDISC, and it's true. CDISC targets the ugly 80. If you want to Google this, there's a great interview with EVP at IBM who talks about the extensive challenges about poor data hygiene, that lots of areas that are in need of automation, lots of areas where AI might work, including clinical research, though he's talking about others, really deal with this fact that 80% of data science involves extensive cleaning and organizing of data. It's the vast majority of work in data science is about dealing with unhygienic data. And unhygienic data is usually not standardized data, or it's poorly standardized data. And so CDISC really targets that ugly 80, that greatest cost center for anyone who's using data, including in the clinical research enterprise. And the next slide, please. Traceability is really important to speak about given the space that we work in. If you want to know where the data came from, how did it end up on a case report form, and then go into that tabulation model and how it finally was analyzed and how those results looked in a table or a recommendation made by a sponsor, you can trace it backwards and forwards. That's certainly important in our world because of the high stakes. The folks we work with at FDA and PMDA and other agencies really have life or death decisions they have to make. And we're proud we're their partner. We're proud we have a role with them because we're making sure they can trace data back and forth. for purposes of data sharing, that's important as well, because if you're looking at a colleague's analysis, if you're looking at someone else's data and you have a question and you want to know where did this come from, if the data has been built to CDISC standards, you can find out. You can go back and look further back, further upstream, and that's an important part of our standards. Bernard, I'll turn it back over to you for our guest to speak.
Okay, excellent. Well, David, thank you. I will go ahead then and hand control over to Dr. Lee, Rebecca, so that she can give their portion of the presentation. Rebecca, the controls are coming your way right now.
Well, thank you so much, David, for the insightful presentation. Ida and I will be sharing the presenter for this segment, and Ida will be going first. So I'll be turning it over to you. So Ida,
thank you.
I'll flip slides for you.
Great, thanks. Thank you, David and Bernard and CDISC for hosting us at this webinar also. And we're very excited to explore potential ways to work together around this critical area of data sharing. As you know, Vivli is focused on sharing clinical trial data, so we'll start off with why to share data and the role of data standards in our particular project, and then Rebecca will give a overview of the global Vivli global platform itself. Next slide. So there are many, many reasons to share clinical research data, and by clinical research data, we're primarily talking about clinical trial data, but also includes observational data. Clearly, there are funder requirements. Some foundations like the Gates, for example, does require the sharing of participant level data. BNIH has a draft data sharing plan that's also proposing that participant level data be made shared at the end of a study's conclusion, and that sharing be taken into account for assessing, funding for future grants. So I think the culture in the funding community is definitely moving towards requiring participant level data sharing. Journals have always been at the forefront for changing our culture of data sharing. I'll say a little bit more about new requirements that have come from journals as of 2018. Those of you in industry are well aware of publicly stated commitments from industry groups around data sharing. But certainly beyond requirements for data sharing, there's the, other than the sticks, there's the carrots. We want to drive new science, want to integrate data to drive new insights. There's certainly ethical obligations to trial participants who have contributed of themselves to studies. And perhaps a little under-recognized is the ability of data sharing to enhance and advance a career. I think most people think of data sharing as a threat first and foremost, but there's more and more studies and data to show that sharing data actually increases your citation, increases the reach, and broadens your impact on science. So I think these are, both sort of stick reasons to share and also carrot reasons to share. Next slide. Diving a little bit deeper into journal requirements, because they were so instrumental, of course, in promoting clinical trial registration, right? That's something we now assume. And believe me, 10, 15 years ago, it was not assumed that every trial was going to be registered. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, you may know them. They include major journals such as the New England Journal, JAMA, Lancet, BMJ, and so forth. They're very influential. Many other journals follow the lead of the ICMJE, and they have a requirement as of July 1st, 2018, that all manuscripts that are describing clinical trials must be submitted with a data sharing statement. So you must tell the editors how you will share your participant level data, and it's quite detailed. It's not like I'm just going to share it, but it includes the who are you going to share, what are you going to share, when, where, why, how are you going to review data requests if they come in. It's really quite a detailed statement that they're asking for. And while IPD sharing itself is not yet required, editors are taking into consideration data sharing statements when making editorial decisions. And we have heard anecdotally that there have been manuscripts that have been returned to the authors because there was no data sharing statement. I think some academics, certainly from our end, still aren't quite aware that that is a requirement, but it is. And then as of January 1st of this year, the ICMJE has another requirement that we have to follow, that for all studies that are started, subsequent to this time, that your data sharing plan has to be entered as part of the trial registration. So really forcing people to think way up front before you start your enrollment of the first patient, how are you going to share your participant level data? And I think that's really critical because data sharing should not be an afterthought. You've heard from David how important it is to be clear about data. The more clear we are up front, the easier it is to share later, and the more useful the data is. So I really commend the ICMJE for putting the thinking of data sharing really right up at the front and making it a requirement for trial registration as well. Next slide. Now, one of the other main reasons, of course, is that patients expect data sharing and reuse. These are tweets from a summit on data sharing that was held at the New England Journal in 2017. And you can see comments like, share the data as widely as possible, as soon as possible to advance human health, right? There was a patient panel and the outcomes was share early, often, with me responsibly and understandably. And I think the last quote on the bottom here really sums up a lot of what we hear from patients and patient advocates. Patients are incredulous that sharing data isn't the norm. They're speaking loudly and clearly, share my data. I was at Medicine X a couple of weeks ago, and again, very, very strong message from patients. Next slide, please, Rebecca. That data sharing is something that we expect. One of our strong patient partners, Jane Perlmutter, says patients don't have patience. Many have rapidly progressing diseases, serious diseases. And their question to us is, why is data used only one time to answer one question? The primary endpoint, there may be other endpoints, but it's primarily designed to answer one question. Why is that data not leveraged to answer multiple questions, to understand disease and define treatments? Why are we not doing that already? And I think that's a question that is difficult to answer by saying, well, it's too hard, it's it threatens my career. No, patients don't have patience, and I think there is an obligation to them to reuse the data, but of course there's also the scientific opportunity that we're all looking for as well. Next slide. Now, recognizing there are many, many reasons to share data, we do also recognize it's actually very difficult to share data. Primarily for academic trialists, there had not been so many options for secure data hosting and sharing. Either they're not available or they might be limited to within a particular institution. And so again, the focus there is on sharing my data to meet regulatory requirements and not so much looking, well, okay, if I had data shared from multiple institutions, how do I put it together if I'm doing a meta-analysis of multiple trials from multiple sources, right? There are no standard data use agreements. If you need an independent review process, you want someone to review the data request. How do you do that with an independent panel so that you're not conflicted in that decision? It's hard to set that up. And of course, it's expensive and difficult to de-identify participant level data, and many trialists don't really understand what that means and don't have the resources to do that. So it makes it difficult on the one hand to share our data. Next point. It's also difficult for those of us who want to reuse other people's data to discover what IPD is available for sharing. It's difficult to combine data sets, as I say, from different platforms and different sources. And of course, this is to talk about data standards, data requirements, and security standards and policies are also quite different. So there are challenges on both sides, on the data contributor side and on the data user side. Next slide. So, data standards, David did a great job of describing why data standards are so important. In the clinical trial analysis situation, of course, increasing the number of data sets that use the data standards will make it far easier to harmonize and integrate studies and perform analyses that you can't really do with summary level results like you might get on clinicaltrials.gov. Really need the participant level data to conduct new subgroup analyses, to model prognostic and diagnostic data, to aggregate studies with the kinds of outcomes such as time to event outcomes like survival, for example. And this is really non-trivial. I love the name of Ugly 80. One of my colleagues here at UCSF works in tuberculosis, and he was part of a project at the World Health Organization to put 3 TB trials together, 3 TB trials. And it took them 2 years to align all the data, clean it up, and come up with an analysis-ready data set. There were about 80 variables that were common across the 3 studies, but taking 2 years to do 3 studies is really ridiculous. And I don't think we're going to have an effective data sharing, work in clinical trials if the reuse of the data is so difficult. Next slide. So before I want to just say what the data is that is shared through Vivli. There is the recommended data that is shared. Of course, it's not just the data itself. It includes the study protocol, which is the final protocol with all amendments, the data dictionary, of course, the detailed descriptions of each variable in the data set, the statistical analysis plan. For those studies that have the clinical study report, that should be included as well. And then the participant individual participant level data, the final cleaned data set has to be de-identified before it comes to Vivli. We also are happy to receive the analytic code as well, perhaps the analysis ready IPD data set, and then case report forms, but those are optional. Next slide. We think there's the opportunity for a platform like Vivli to drive the adoption of common data elements or common variables. We start at the left here that as studies come in and they are not aligned in their variables, that as groups use Vivli and map those variables to some common variables, publish on those and show why those common variables are important and in fact are good predictors and are useful biomarkers, common data elements, that perhaps that can be incorporated into future protocols. And as those studies get completed, they get put back in the platform, and then it eases sort of the next round of data aggregation and data analysis. This is something that we're deliberately trying to set up within our platform because we have the opportunity of bringing data contributors and data users together. So I think these are some exciting things that we can do around data standards and look forward to the discussion after, but Rebecca will now go on and give us an overview of the Vivli platform itself.
Thank you so much, Ida. Next, I'd like to just spend a few minutes on the Vivli platform for data sharing and reuse to show you this as a use case. So Vivli is the name for the entity, our nonprofit organization. We offer convening functions for the biomedical industry, so pharma, biotech, device industries, academia, nonprofit funders and foundations, as well as the government. We also bring together patients and patient advocates. We've worked hard to harmonize language around agreements such as data use agreements and data contributor agreements, and to move the culture of data sharing. Vivli is also the name for our platform, a user-friendly, secure, state-of-the-art data sharing platform that serves the international community. We are disease agnostic and include trials from a diverse set of stakeholders, as you'll see. We have solution models for data sharing that are across institutions. So we have institutional memberships, but we also have solutions for individual researchers. So for teams that need to share and reuse their data, that covers single publications or trials. So we have those that span both of these solution models. We also have a very diverse membership, and we're very proud of that. So we have members from the industry. So you can see members from the industry that includes, for example, AbbVie, Biogen, Takeda, and Pfizer. Then members from the academic institutes, so for example, Hopkins, Harvard, Duke, UCSF, and then we have other nonprofit institutions like Critical Path, Duke, Helmsley. So we have a really nice, well-rounded membership. We also have other platforms like Project DataSphere and the NIH. So the BioLink is one of the largest cardiovascular platforms that is out there that is run by the NIH. So all of this kind of umbrellas within Vivli, and we network to these other platforms as well. So what does this really mean? This means within Vivli, this is the only platform that you can integrate data across all of these data contributors. And that is very powerful to drive forward new scientific insights. If that is, if you're a scientist and is interested in any one of the trials from some of these data contributors within Vivli and the Microsoft Azure environment, you can request studies and integrate them within the Vivli environment. Some of the benefits of sharing through Vivli is really ease of sharing, so sharing the identified data, citations, so we mint digital object identifiers, metrics, long-term archiving, and meeting the funder and journal requirements. So accessing data in Vivli, so we have, we're one of the largest data sharing platforms for clinical trials. We have over 4,600 trials that represents 2 million participants from 109 countries, again, from a number of diverse stakeholders. So our secure environment, just to show you what this really looks like, so you can so someone who requests data could really sit at their own computer and securely access data from a number of different data contributors. For example, in this example, they're accessing data from BioLink, a very large NIH platform, Johnson & Johnson, Import, again, another NIH platform, Project DataSphere, and GSK, all at one. Shown here is a snapshot of the most frequently searched terms on Vivli, and this really shows disease terms, a few drug terms. This is really a snapshot in time. This changes frequently, but really demonstrates the diversity and breadth of the community that we serve. This is the data request and access process. For those that are interested in accessing data on Vivli, search the Vivli platform for information about studies. Request the data package, and each data request is reviewed according to the contributor's publicly stated requirements. Once that request is granted, access data from approved requests in the secure enclave, or it may be downloaded upon permission. The data is then analyzed using robust analytical tools to combine and integrate the multiple data sets, and then disseminate. So we follow data request all the way through dissemination. And so, for any of those researchers that are interested in exploring data on Vivli, we really invite you to explore Vivli. That ends my presentation, and I know we're open for questions at this point. Thanks so much. I turn it back over to you, well, I think, Rebecca, Bernard and David.
Yes, and thank you very much for all that info. So I am going to switch control back over to myself right quick.
Well, Ida and Rebecca, thank you both.
Control pan.
Hey, Bernard, I have a quick question.
There we go. You bet.
So Ida and Rebecca, thank you both so much. I mean, it's been great to see so much growth in use of the Vivli platform. You're just over a year old. Can you just let me know, has it progressed as much as you hoped initially? And what do you think is going to happen next? What's the next big thing we're going to see from Vivli?
No, that's a great question. So you're right. We did launch in July at the National Academy of Science, and our growth has been, we're humbled to say it's been better than expected. Things have really taken off, especially on the contribution side. We've almost doubled the number of studies that we're sharing through Vivli. We've seen really a steady growth in terms of the number of proposals that have been submitted through Vivli, and we're really at an inflection point at that in terms of that respect. In the future, we foresee the platform being leveraged by even a greater variety of stakeholders for different uses, for example, for community verticals and to drive forward new types of science. We also see different types of data coming onto Vivli. We started to see that, for example, genomics data, and we hope to see other types of data being explored as well, for example, real-world data as well. So I think that's really a window into the future for Vivli, and great question. Thank you.
All right. And did y'all have some more questions that you wanted to put to each other, or should we go on ahead and move into our audience questions?
Yeah, I mean, I know I had some questions for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Certainly.
Sure. So, I thought your talk was really insightful, and I know you mentioned a few times, and it's really clear from the slides, that data standards have evolved. I know CDISC is really at the forefront of that, but you did mention a few times that they're ripe for innovation and are certainly evolving. Where do you feel like, what is CDISC's role in driving that forward? And
Yeah.
maybe, I know I've heard a little bit about CDISC 360. Could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure, absolutely. And we have some 360 slides up there under innovation. But I think just in an interest of time, I'll try to give it a quick answer on a couple levels. CDISC is like most other standards development organizations. Our model is really built around a two-dimensional way of looking at standards. On the kind of on the left side might be all the variables you might use, and across the top, just like an Excel file, would be kind of all that metadata, the who, what, when, where, and why. And so if you think about kind of the way the world looks now, that model is ripe for changing, is ripe for replacing, and we're already at work for that. We've launched something we call CDISC Library, which is a metadata repository. It's a machine-readable instantiation of all of our data standards, and it's huge. It actually has 1 million pieces of metadata, 1 million units, and with 6 million connections. We've used a graph database, which is, I'm sure everyone on the call probably can understand and explain it better than I can, but it's the idea that there's an object, a relationship, and an object, and so it's pretty easy to link things in a way that looks a little bit like that mind map that I showed just a piece of earlier. So in answer to your question, Rebecca, what we think is ripe for innovation is, in some sense, lowering the threshold of access to standards. Right now, when people come to us to learn about CDISC standards, the analogy I use, it's like someone comes and says, teach me to drive a car. And we say, okay, and we teach them how to design and build an internal combustion engine, a steering column, the 8-track tape player, and the transmission. And really, they just want to know how to use the gear shift and the steering wheel and maybe turn signals, right? And so by instantiating everything in the library, we can build out now, and so can others in our community. We already see some technology companies doing this and some open source companies. Open source organizations, they can build user interfaces that are much easier to use for people, like a lot of your academics. You mentioned, folks in the academic world sharing data sets and some of the requirements on publication. Man, do we want those folks to actually have to become CDISC standards experts and study for years? No, we want them doing good science. We want them curing TB. We want them working on Alzheimer's and type 1 diabetes. And so part of what CDISC can do is lower that threshold. I think the other component, you mentioned 360, and for that I do probably need some slides, but the short way to describe 360 is to say, when you go fill out an online form and it says birth date, and you can only pick a month, day, and a year. You can't say your birth date is orange. You can't, select your birth date as the country Uruguay, right? CDISC standards aren't like that right now. We have not built a meta layer of information to actually explain how the standards all link to each other, which is required for automating the standards. And so 360 is an ambitious project. I probably don't have time to go into it today. The folks in our membership can certainly take a look at it. There's a webinar online that's available. But at the end of the project, one of the things we hope we'll be able to do is to automate more, and particularly to standardize tables, listings, and figures, which are so common in our world and which right now aren't completely standardized. I'll probably stop there. That's a lot of answer.
David,
No,
thanks
that's
for that.
great.
Thanks for that answer. I'm, super glad to hear that, there's so much effort put into making CDISC more usable for those who are not so steeped in the standards world. And I come from academia, and actually there's not that much familiarity with CDISC. And when I suggest taking a look at CDISC, often they say, why should we do that? And I think we've covered reasons for that in this webinar so far. But the next question is often, well, what are the alternatives? Why CDISC and why not something else? And what else is there? How could you help us with that question?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are other standards out there, and I'm not an expert. I mean, we work with several of them. There's a great group called GA4GH, which is it's genomic standards, genomics data, which we don't standardize, but we're trying to figure out how do we partner and how do we make it possible to move data from from one place to another, particularly if genomics data is needed for a clinical research study. There's a wonderful group called ICHOM, which started out as a way to better understand outcomes, like surgical outcomes, and they've grown to build what they call standards. It really informs what kind of data should be collected at a clinician visit. It's a little bit like preloading your EHR data. And we're fascinated with ICHOM. We have a growing partnership with them. I mentioned HL7. So HL7 FHIR is commonly used for EHR data. It's a mature and well-respected standard. We have a couple projects we've been working with HL7 and with Fuse. We have a great partnership with an organization called Fuse that's kind of a global user community, not just of CDISC standards, but of other standards. And we've worked with them on a few things. We've had a partnership for a while now that's about eSource, which is kind of pre-populating our CDASH, our collection case report forms, utilizing EHR data that comes out of HL7, and we use APIs for that. We use an application program interface for each end of that. That's a great project that's actually just had an inflection point that's ended, and we'll do some public reporting about that. Before that, we worked with we've worked with Transcelerate Biopharma and a few other folks on similar kinds of issues. And then there's a project going on right now that is PCORInet funded. It includes FDA and NCI, and it's a project at NCI called the Common Data Model Harmonization Project. That's easy for me to say, CDMH, Ida. And so that project really is building tools to allow people, whatever source they've built their data, whatever standard, to move data at least at a high level among data standards. So CDISC and HL7 FHIR components. Oh, OMOP is another one. I didn't mention OMOP. OMOP is a common data model built by Odyssey. It's used by for observational studies. It's been around for several years. We certainly work with folks who use OMOP. That's a long answer. The short answer I'd also say is we don't want more standards. We need to figure out ways to work with the standards we have, because the irony is right at this point when we need better standardized data, it seems like there are more folks out there saying, let's just make a new standard. And what we need to do is to try to build interoperability among those standards that exist, OMOP and FHIR and CDISC and GA4GH and any others, and to reduce the barriers and to use technology to do that. That's why I'm proud of what we're doing at CDISC with the library and the API on the library, is because if we reduce those barriers, kind of the standards really fade to the background. People interact with user interfaces that help them build and manage their data sets. And so researchers can focus on their research and not focus on becoming standards experts.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ida. You mentioned a little bit when you talked, Ida, about incentives, and that's something we see as well, particularly for academic researchers. There aren't many incentives to standardize their data. What do you think Vivli can do, and CDISC as well, to promote data sharing and to incentivize researchers sharing their data? Do you think it should be mandatory?
I would like it to be mandatory. I think the world is moving towards that. You know, we do need to address sort of the pragmatics of data sharing. I think Vivli has gone a long way towards that. I'm particularly excited that Vivli is an opportunity to bring data contributors and data users together, because they have different needs, but they have complementary needs. And I think the way forward for data sharing is to have a balanced focus on the needs of both the data contributors and the data users. So I think two examples for that. One is sort of this community of data sharing. We've heard from people who do IPD meta-analysis that, you know, once you get the data set, that's just the beginning, right? You have to understand the data, you have to understand the study to properly interpret the variables, and then you need to map them across the different trials that you're putting together. And, you know, lots of opportunities to get it wrong. And really, if you're trying to do a really good IPD meta-analysis, you really do need to talk with the people who originally generated the trial. The people who originally ran the trial, you know, would like perhaps to have some input on how their data is used or reused. You know, because IPD meta-analysis has not been that common, people have sort of organically connected and did projects together. At a large scale, like we're providing with Vivli, what does that community look like? How do we, you know, support collaboration between data users and data contributors? How do we manage academic credit? Those are issues that we're watchful of the evolution of the community, and we will support and nudge where appropriate. We do partner with groups like the MRCT, with AAMC around the issue of credit for data sharing. That's critically important. At UCSF, we are actually just starting a project to incorporate data sharing into our promotions process. And Vivli is very committed to providing data on the reuse. So if you share your data set through Vivli, you will get data on how many people have requested it, if they've accessed your data, if they published on it. Those are the kinds of sort of metrics that we need to collect so that we can help further the whole data sharing enterprise. So I think that's really important just on the level of credit for data sharing. I think another very exciting thing that we would like to set up, as I briefly mentioned in our slides, is as we look at balancing the needs of data contributors and data users, let's start with the data users. They need data to come in that, you know, is common variables, right? I've done meta-analysis. It's very difficult to put together apples, oranges, pears. You know, if they all came in with the same variables, that would make life a lot easier. And I think that can be done without threatening the science behind it. And in fact, it would facilitate the science. But it is very hard for people who are designing studies to say, okay, well, what common data elements should I put into my protocol? And why do I want to go through all that, you know, all that challenge? ICHOM, for example, David, you mentioned, fantastic organization, very interesting. You know, these are common measures, right? But why should I invest that effort to use the common measures? You know, NIH has a CDE library that has 20,000 common data elements. You know, with that kind of overwhelming choice, I would just go and build my own. Right now, you can't. You just define your own variable in your protocol, you run your study, and there are no consequences. You know, either good or bad about that. You just define your own variables. With a data sharing platform like this, I think when they see that the variables, if they upfront, you know, plan to use common variables, that it would facilitate data sharing. And in fact, the next time they go and look at other people's data to combine data to generate preliminary data for their next study, then I think people will start seeing, they'll make the link between the effort needed to put in a accommodative variable in the protocol and the value of that, at the other end when you're sharing the data and reusing the data. And that's something like a platform like ours that is really looking at the needs of both data contributors and data users. We can really intentionally work on that relationship, bring that out, make it easier, and then build in the metrics that help drive this sort of virtuous cycle. So those are things that we're looking to do as Vivli evolves.
It sounds like there is a lot of change going on. We've seen that in the pharmaceutical industry a little bit, a little while ago. That movement's already started. In the old days in pharma, you really just wanted to get your data, through the goalpost. You wanted to get your product on the market, and then you were done. And now you look at all the major pharma companies, and they recognize data is a precious resource, that reuse of data is really valuable. And there's lots of insights that you may not have realized that the first time you could get out of a study or out of a data set, or even a failed study. And it's nice to hear that. In the old days, no academic really got tenure for doing a good job standardizing their data or sharing their data. No one got published for those things. So I'm glad to hear that the gears of progress are turning even slowly.
Yes, they are turning. I think we have always considered Vivli a platform that lowers the barriers to iterating towards a better data sharing environment, right? I don't think any of us really know exactly how to do data sharing at the large, which is what we're trying to get to. But with Vivli, we have the technical, the policy, the partnerships that allow us to try different things. And as Rebecca said, it's going better than we had thought already. So we're very, very encouraged with our progress and see that there's a lot more to do.
Good to hear. I think we have time for a few more questions. Bernard, do we have any questions from the audience?
We most certainly do. I am going to share my screen again real quick. I had to put us on, my slides away so that I could add all of your questions into the slide deck so that people can actually see them. One question I was just going to address broadly, we've had a bunch of people ask if the slides will be made available or if they'll be sent out to people. We will not be sending them out to people, but they will be available on the CDISC website in the members only section. And the recording of this webinar will also be, it will be on the CDISC website, but it will also be available on the Vivli website after we get it all processed and rendered and everything. So that aside, let me get into, so there are a handful of questions here at the beginning that people submitted before the presentation. So I guess the first one was asking if an overview of the process for partnership between CDISC and Vivli will be provided, and if so, what are the methods that are in place to work together between our two organizations? Do y'all feel like you've answered that one fairly well with the previous conversations?
I think so. It's great. Let me just say on the Vivli side, it's really great that this question was submitted in advance. I think this is a work in progress, but we really look forward to our continued alliance with CDISC, because our missions are quite synergistic, and look forward to our continued alliance with CDISC and move together in a forward motion.
All right.
Ditto from me.
Short and sweet. This question, I think, was directed specifically at Vivli. So it was, are there any charges to sponsors that share data? Are there any charges to the requesters? And generally, then, how does Vivli finance its efforts? And I know you touched on your financial backing piece, but I guess in terms of the charges to the sponsors and requesters.
Right, I'm happy to address this question. So, in an ideal world, data sharing would be free, right? But we're a nonprofit. We do have certain costs, right? And we do have to cover those. So we do charge our members, and anyone who's interested can come to me. We have charges for data contributors. They are, and you can come to me directly. There is kind of a sliding scale for, you know, how large those entities are. I'm sorry, I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. If you're not and it's not disturbing, I'll continue to go on. And it is really managed by kind of size of entity. So we do charge the members that contribute data. There really is no charge for requesters or for the data itself, but there is a charge for using the research environment after the first year, and it's a very nominal charge. It is on our website. It's something like $10 a day if someone doesn't finish their analysis within the first year. And it's a little bit like, you know, leaving the lights on. We do have to pay for, you know, the research environment, the software licensing, and all that. But most people don't have to pay anything if they're on the requester side. So it's a good question. Thank you.
I'd like to add that for individuals who are sharing data not through their institution, that the charge to put their data on Vivli is on the order of what you might pay for an open access publication, well within the budget for a clinical trial. And I think what's really exciting for Vivli is that once you do this and you can consider that you sort of in some sense sort of published your data set, it goes on Vivli. Vivli manages that sharing even after your grant funds run out. So, you know, as an academic, I'm always thinking, oh, you know, my grant's over, my staff have left, I have no money left for this project. And then 3 years later, somebody requests my data. You know, how do I manage that, right? And actually Vivli takes care of that. And so that I think is a really, really big benefit for academics.
Yeah, thank you, Ida. And I did miss that last point, that we realize that the lifetime of the grant does not really overlap with the lifetime that data sharing activities need to occur. And so we've really worked with funders to manage that aspect. Thanks.
Okay, all right. Our next question, so we had somebody ask in terms of redaction solutions, what are the options out there? Does somebody want to tackle that one?
Is this for you, CDISC?
I guess so. So I'm thinking redaction related to like anonymizing patient level data. I know Ida on her slide talked about you know, patient level data being shared on the platform. So CDISC definitely has some information on our website about anonymizing data. The Fuse website has more. There are some specific strategies depending on where and how the data is collected. Other than that, if someone's in a study and they're removed from the study for some reason, in our standard, there's a way to represent that. So if redaction means a participant in a study departing from the study and why that might have happened, that's actually part of our standard explaining those kinds of situations. So I'm not sure what else is meant by redaction, but those are the two that I can think of.
Okay. Yeah, and that was one of the questions that came in ahead of time, so we didn't have an opportunity to clarify.
No worries.
Okay, well, our next question is for Vivli specifically, and we had somebody from BioCK asking, is there any open clinical data set in CDISC SDTM format accessible via Vivli or any other open data platform?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think we have to kind of talk about the different types of data platforms. We really, for the interest of time, do not talk about kind of open, kind of restricted, and kind of managed access. So I want to talk just very clearly that we are kind of a managed access platform, meaning that, you know, we're interposed between the requester and the data contributor. So I don't know what exactly means by open, but most people think about that as, you know, just requesting and the data set being downloadable. That type of data is not available on Vivli. you do need to put in a proposal, as I mentioned, and before being provided access and signing of a data use agreement. So that is how data is accessed on our platform. We do have data that is in SDTM format. Primarily, that is data from the industry, and we did show that we have a large number of industry sponsors. Primarily, that data does come from our industry sponsors. Right now, those data sets are not flagged as in a data standard. That could be one way we could move forward in the future in a development path, is to flag some of the data sets that are in a standardized format. That might be useful for our users, something we are contemplating. And I could ask our friends on the phone from CDISC as how we would actually know which data sets are coming in CDISC format, because that is not easy always for us to know.
Yeah, that's probably something we should talk about, is maybe helping folks who share data with you to describe if it's coming in SDTM or if there's ATOM for the analysis component. That's probably a discussion we could have, but it's probably something you want to ask the contributor. I mean, it's just because our standards are publicly available, lots of people use them. CDISC standards were never built initially for academic users. And yet we still find folks all over the world who've taught themselves CDISC or attended one of our trainings or another kind of a training, and they've built data sets using CDISC, and they're not in industry. We actually have a project related to this right now that I mentioned. Rhonda Facile, who I think is on the call, on our leadership team, one of our technical leaders and the VP of Development Opportunity, she's leading an effort called CDISC RWD Connect. And we've gotten, I think, 40, mostly academic users of CDISC, a few others, and a few of our staff who are knowledgeable in this area, who are actually going to work together over 18 months to build some tools to better understand the needs of academic users of CDISC first, and then second, to build some tools, particularly off the library API that I mentioned earlier, to recommend some of the things we could do in training and education as well, to try to help people build data sets off CDISC standards. So I think that's related as well, because then it helps people understand if they've certainly if they communicate to you that the data set is built to CDISC, but also so that they can understand if they've done a good job or not, and maybe be able to share that somehow.
Okay.
Great.
I think that actually segues real nicely into our next question that is directed at CDISC specifically, but we had someone ask relating to the CDISC 360 mission, is end-to-end traceability related to that? So David?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, CDISC has always been committed to end-to-end traceability, even prior to 360. I think 360 kind of puts a pragmatic element to it. If we're successful, and 360 is an innovative project. I mean, it's a huge lift. I'll say a little bit more about it in a second, but it is really a pragmatic approach to automating CDISC standards from beginning to end and from end to end. And so specifically by end to end, it means starting with where you hope you end up. What's the analysis components you want to have for the study? What kinds of tables, listings, and figures are you going to have at the end of the process? And then automatically selecting the standards. And then finally, in our last use case for this project, pushing real live data. Back to the earlier question about real data. We have folks in the community who've committed data sets to this project to make sure it works. And so we'll actually demonstrate in a practical way end-to-end traceability. I should have mentioned earlier that this project initially was the brainchild of our brilliant Chief Standards Officer, Peter Van Russel, and it's since been picked up by our community. So we now have 24, 25 member companies in China, Japan, Europe, and the US that have all committed staff to it. So these, we call them volunteers, they're paid by their company. CDISC doesn't pay them, and we have more than 60 people committed to this project in 5 work streams. Our community's really embraced it because that dream of end-to-end traceability and end-to-end automation is shared broadly across our community, and you know, I feel good about it. I feel like it's going to be successful. We certainly have the right people and the right leadership.
All right, excellent. Okay, so our next question was, and this I think is for everybody, is are there any specific disease area examples that benefited from data sharing and resulted in successes for new therapies and treatments?
This is
Ida, do you want to take this? I mean, there are a number in the, you know, OBG obstetric area and cardiology, but Ida, do you want to be more specific? And I know you've been working in this area for a long time.
I don't have any specific stories directly related to this that, you know, we know there are, you know, many disease groups that have focused very much on data sharing and are starting and launching very large projects aggregating, you know, around Parkinson's, for example, and these are disease patient advocacy organizations are involved as well because, you know, clearly see the benefits that can come. I think I might want to pivot from this question to think broadly about what the benefits are from data sharing. Certainly, we want new therapies and we want new treatments. We want new publications. But I think really the bulk of the benefit from data sharing might be, you know, perhaps you might consider it more mundane, but it's how to design the next study better. What are the endpoints that should be chosen? What are the effect sizes that we can estimate a little bit better so we can optimize sample size? You know, recruitment is a huge issue. There's so much that we can reuse from our prior data that can inform the design of studies in a way that would be more efficient and more scientifically informative. That's going to be difficult to capture because, you know, people aren't going to be publishing about how I analyze data and then optimize my endpoint choices. But I think that's actually a very large component of the value that we see coming out from data sharing that we shouldn't lose sight of.
I think that's well said, Ida. And we have a specific example in the CDISC world. You know, the therapeutic area user guides I mentioned earlier. You partner with CPATH. That's a member of Vivli. They're also our partner in building those TAUGs. And in early days, we had and it's still in use. We have a TAUG for polycystic kidney disease that's been around for a while. And working with CPATH and with our member community and our user community, the FDA qualified total kidney volume as a prognostic biomarker to select patients for clinical trials for polycystic kidney disease a couple years ago. So that's kind of a data reuse success story in our world that aligns with exactly what you described, Ida.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So our next question comes with a little bit of praise. Somebody's saying this webinar has been great with an amazing amount of information, and I concur. So the question is, since CDISC doesn't actually run clinical trials, is CDISC working with Vivli in the standardization of the data in the, presumably in the clinical trials that Vivli is working with?
That's certainly under discussion. So I've heard that from a few sources. Like Vivli, we're a small nonprofit. We're always trying to do as much as we can with a finite amount of resource. But we're certainly interested in this partnership with Vivli and want to continue to see it grow. We see a lot of benefits for all data sharing platforms to be able to be places where folks can access standardized data and be kind of access points as well for how to improve standardization of data. How can you, if you want to use this platform, ensure that you have standardized data that you're sharing and know the quality of the standardized data you're getting out. I don't know how to do that at this point, but it's certainly under discussion. And I'm glad that.
Thank you, David. I concur, absolutely.
Okay. Well, and once again, I think we have another question that segues into quite well. So someone asked, what do our presenters feel are the top 3 drivers for organizations adopting clinical data standards outside of regulatory requirements, and clarifying the top 3 drivers that would focus organizations to adopt those standards? Who wants to start on that one?
Well, so just because we're doing this RWD Connect project that I mentioned, we've been talking to academics, so folks who are definitely not required by any regulatory requirement to use CDISC standards. And when we've asked them, why did you choose to use CDISC standards? I don't know that it's an order of top 3, but some of the things we've heard, certainly folks understand the value of standards. They want to future-proof their data. The way I say it, and I quote a colleague of mine who used to be at the New York Genome Center, he's a medical school professor now, who always says your best collaborator is your future self. Well, if your best collaborator is your future self, you want to make sure your future self knows what the heck's in your today's data, right? So I think a lot of smart academics get that standardizing data makes sense. To Ida's earlier point, they're not always sure which standard to use or how to access it, but at least in the universe of people that kind of know CDISC out there, they've kind of chosen CDISC for some reason. But I think that's a big driver. Another big driver is that people understand that standardizing data is really about doing a good job. There's a moral obligation to it. I think Ida hit on this as well when she said, patients aren't patient. Diane Wold, who's kind of famous in the world of CDISC and our staff member and brilliant in so many ways, and one of the creators of SDTM, Diane has a really great way to say this. She always says that there's a moral imperative. When a patient enters a clinical trial, they certainly want to benefit themselves if possible, absolutely. But they also are giving their data. They're letting their body be utilized for an experiment. And they want to make sure we do a good job with that data. And so I think the other driver that I hear folks say is that they feel like there's a moral imperative, that they need to really make sure they get all the value out of that data, not just from an economic kind of a sense, but from the sense that this person has really done something powerful and amazing for humanity. And let's make sure we honor that, and let's make sure we do a good job of it. Those are 2 that I hear frequently.
Yeah, I might chime in on that. I think on the academic side, there are certainly individual investigators who see the value of standardizing and are kind to their future selves. I think most academic institutions have not seen this as something that we can support at the institutional level. There are so many challenges with initiating clinical trials and managing them and meeting regulatory requirements. I think sort of this forward-thinking view of taking care of our future selves as an institution, is sort of, is a big lift for an institution to be dealing with. That said, I think that is starting to be thought about. There's a lot more of a focus on infrastructure and informatics infrastructure, certainly through the CTSAs that many of you are familiar with, that NIH funds the major academic medical centers. There is thinking about what is that common infrastructure and where does standards fit in. And I'm glad to hear that CDISC is part of that picture, because we talk a lot about EHR data standards, but I think standards in the clinical trial space and the clinical research space is also very critical. And CDISC, of course, is a global leader on that. So I think on the institutional side, there's certainly a lot of work left to be done. Most of that focus, I think, has been on standards for the organization, the format, the exchange of clinical trial data. I think it's a much heavier lift when we're talking about content standards, whether you know, if you as an investigator should be using specific common data elements. This is the variable you should use for a study on congestive heart failure, for example. And that seems to cut against, you know, the grain of scientific freedom in a sense, but really it isn't. You know, we can do better science if we you know, standardize on variables that we basically all agree on, so that we can cut out some of the heterogeneity that doesn't really need to be there. We're starting to see that the National Institute of Drug Abuse, NIDA, actually does put into their RFAs that there are standard definitions for, you know, for addiction-related variables that you should use unless you have a reason not to. So in your grant proposal for a clinical trial that you want funded by NIDA, you're supposed to say why you're not using the common data elements. And I think that's reasonable. If you have a good clinical scientific reason for defining your own variable, by all means, that's how science advances. But you know, where you don't need to be so individualistic, there's no reason not to use a common data element. We just need to get this into the culture, and certainly the funding agencies are ones that can help drive that.
All right, excellent. So we've got a handful more, well, we have quite a few more questions, but only a little bit more time. So what we'll do is we'll get through these next couple of questions that I had enough time to get on slides. And then if we don't get to your question, I will pass those questions along to our panelists, and then we can get answers, and I will have them added to the slide deck. That way folks can take a look at them after the fact. So our next question was for Dr. Sim, and it's up to what level of clinical trial would be shared in terms of ongoing versus completed trials?
Vivli addresses the sharing of completed trials. That's what we are built for. There's been, you know, it's already a challenging problem enough. We do have some partners who are coming to us to discuss the sharing of ongoing trials. Rebecca, you want to address that?
Sure. I mean, Ida's absolutely right. You know, we're built for sharing of completed clinical trials. We are exploring those that might be interested in sharing of ongoing trials if they have cohorts that are they would like to share of ongoing clinical trials, but we are not a, you know, CTMS, clinical trial management system for data capture.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so our next question was, so somebody was giving a little background on their question, saying that they had tried Project DataSphere and to get access to several different sets of data, but that no one was following the CDISC SDTM format. So they were asking, is there any method for acquiring clinical data sets in SDTM format if that was, presumably if that wasn't the format that they were already initially put into?
So moving legacy data sets from some format, other format to CDISC is incredibly intense. There are companies that do it. It's very expensive. They usually do it for sponsors, for pharmaceutical companies. It's probably not something that I think is realistic for most just kind of data sharing. There certainly are folks who specialize in this who move legacy data sets to SDTM. Some do a really good job, but as any rare skill, it's pretty expensive.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Let's see here, and then our next question was,
can I push on that one, because I think that's really, you know, struggling with that, because we do have data sets that are not in SDTM, you know, many of them that are available through Vivli. And, you know, there's a thought that, well, if they were put into SDTM, then at least it's easier to, you know, that common organization, David, that you presented, right? That's really useful. Because at some point you do need to put them in a common organization to analyze them anyway, so why not do it in SDTM? That might be one question. And another thing that we're exploring is, well, let's say that you did, transform a number of data sets into SDTM, could that derivative data set be reused? But the next person who comes along and wants to analyze perhaps the same set of trials, this is an ongoing meta-analysis of a common question, perhaps, could that data set have continued value once it's in SDTM? And again, we're not talking about putting all studies that are shared on Vivli in SDTM right from the get-go. It's really sort of on an on-demand basis. People are looking to aggregate across trials. Does it make sense then to put in an SDTM, or are you saying that's just too big a lift and we really should be thinking about SDTM at the front end and not at the back end?
I would say it's always to think about at the front end. It certainly can be done at the back end, but it's not simple. There is this project I mentioned earlier, the CDMH, Common Data Model Harmonization Project. And when it's complete, it will have tools that can certainly help transform data. And so it's transforming from things like OMOP to SDTM. But it's not complete at this point. I think there's still a year or two to go. There are probably other projects that I'm not aware of, and those would probably help. But I still think if you're looking at a complete clinical trial data set that's been built not in CDISC format, that's a huge lift.
Okay, would certainly like to follow up with you on that more.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I can imagine that would make things extremely difficult. So we are coming up on the end of our time here. So we do have more questions that people ask that we're not going to be able to get to right now. But again, I will forward those questions along to our panelists and see if we can get those answered. Just wanted to thank you all, David, Rebecca, and Ida, for taking the time to have this really awesome dialogue. This was a lot of great information, but also just it was good to hear the conversation back and forth between both our organizations and between the three of you. So thank you so much for all of the work that you do with our respective organizations and also the work that you did putting this presentation together. I have a couple things that I want to get through real quickly. I will try to speed through them. So we did have a question, somebody was asking relative to non-CRO, non-pharma, non-clinical organizations, trying to find out more about how to use the standards. Somebody asked, how can we begin to learn to use the new standards? And one of the great ways to do that is by attending one of our trainings. We have face-to-face trainings that take place all over the world, and as well as webinars like this. And then we also have a ton of online material. I'll get to that in just a second and hopefully get y'all out of here with just a minute over, so I apologize. Our public trainings, so we have trainings happening in North America, Europe, and Asia. All of these are going to be on the CDISC website, so you can go to cdisc.org and then go to the education tab and go to public trainings and find all of this information. Next week is our big US event, our US interchange. We've got a bunch of trainings that we're lining up for 2020, and more of those keep getting nailed down. So you can keep checking back on our website to see if a new training has cropped up closer to you, because we're just setting them up all over the place right now. So these are the ones we've got set up in North America. We have one in Copenhagen coming up in a couple weeks in Europe, and then next year one in the UK. And then we have several set up in Asia. We've got 2 in Tokyo, 1 in Osaka, all happening in 2020. Registration pages for those are on the way. Our next upcoming webinar is on December 3rd, and it is the CDISC Myths and Truths. That's a working title, so we may have a slightly different title by the time it actually gets closer to it. But we're going to be talking, dispelling some myths and discussing some ideas and about CDISC standards. If you're interested in finding out more information about our public trainings or setting up a private training with just you and your organization, because we can do that as well, get in touch with us. That's the website, the cdisc.org/education/on-site-training. That is where you can find out more information about how to do that. We can actually in addition to our public trainings where the public is welcome, we can come out to your company, and we have a lot of our members request that we do this, and bring our certified instructors to talk about the standards. And we can sometimes get a little bit more specific and talk about projects that your organization is working on. Whereas in our public trainings, we speak a little bit more broadly about the standards. So, and then we also have a ton of online material. If you go to the website, go to that education tab where the big red arrow is, and then go to My Learning, you can find all of our info on our learning management system. We have a handful of free courses, but we have online modules that start at kind of the meta introductory level of each of the standards and drill down to get real specific. And it's, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of hours of material. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, even if you're not a member of CDISC, go to the CDISC website and create a login. Just requires an email address and a password, and that will get you then access to be able to go check out what all we have in here. And if you are if you're employed by a CDISC member organization, make sure that you use your employer email address. That way we can verify membership, because that actually gets you discounts on some of the online materials and access to our members only section, which has all of our webinar recordings from here until we began recording webinars. So I will skip by all this. This is information that will be included in the slides that you can check out on why it is important to be a CDISC member. For those of you who are already CDISC members, thank you very much for your time and membership and support, because without you, we would not be able to do the work that we're doing, developing the standards, and also, very importantly, keeping them free for anyone to use. That's a huge benefit. So again, thank you all for taking the time to join us this morning / afternoon, depending on where you're situated in the world. We will work on getting those questions that weren't answered during the presentation answered after the fact. Keep your eyes peeled on the CDISC website and on the Vivli website for the recording. Otherwise, if you have any other questions, if you wake up in the middle of the night tonight and think, oh my gosh, there's this question that I really wanted to ask, you can email me right there. It's bclinky@cdisc.org. But otherwise, I will release you to your day. Thank you for your patience in letting me go over time by 5 minutes. We appreciate you being here, and we will hope to see you at our next webinar. Y'all take care. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.